Hello, this is Tony again, and I'm back with the second sequence of the ATS Robot, which is the solitaire system for ATS so that you can use to play solitaire where you don't have to play yourself versus the other. So the first video, I showed you what you got, which this is the finished product. You have your rules, you have your player aid, and then you have your cards. Now I have, as I've shown, cut the cards out and put them in the card sleeves because you will be shuffling them quite regularly. So what I want to do in this video is I want to go through the sequence of play for how the robot module works. So it's different enough from standard ATS. Many of the rules stay the same, but how the segments go are a little different, and it really does help with the kind of fog of war or not knowing what's kind of happening. I mean, the cards definitely dictate how the AI player will play, but how many activations they get, things like that, it really does kind of adjust on that. So I'm going to go through the rules here, and I'm going to show some of the cards, and then I'm going to talk about a few specific rules that are different from standard ATS that I think were important enough to kind of point out. The next video in the series, I'm going to go through, and we're going to go through a little bit more detail. I'm going to have a map. I'm going to have units set up. We're going to do at least one turn, if maybe not more than one turn. But for this video, I really wanted to go through the sequence of play for the robot, some of the differences, and then the anatomy of the cards. So since the cards are the main thing, I really want to make sure that we understand that the cards are understood and things like that. So with no further ado, let's move forward. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the sequence of play for the robot. So this is going to be different for a couple of reasons. So first of all, there is no indirect fire segment, and you use the robot sequence of play is completely replacing the standard ATS sequence of play, the ATS fully engaged. What you do during the action segment is when the cards come in. So you draw a card first and foremost. So we're going to go through, I'm going to draw the cards, and I'm going to tell you what you're going to do with each of these cards. There's 4 different cards during the action segment that can come up. So let's take a look at the first card. The first card is a player impulse. Okay, so we're just going to leave that there while I talk about this. So the player impulse, the player may perform one impulse. The impulse includes, you may perform one impulse on the following. Now again, the impulse is the standard activation, hex, unit, or platoon units. You're able to use those. But you can perform one of these actions. Onboard guns can fire smoke. You can place flares, aircraft attack, off-map indirect fire, counter battery fire, movement, fire, place smoke grenades, pass, or any other SSR. So basically you can do any action with your activation. So when the card comes up, that's when you go through. So that's the first card. The next card that it could possibly is the robot player. And we'll get into more of this when we get into the anatomy of the card. But basically, in this case, you'll follow the instructions. It says robot player. And again, I'll go through the anatomy of the card, but there are 4 different lines of instructions. You do the first that you are able to do for the robot player. Pretty simple on that one. The next card is going to be a new orders card. This is where just follow what it says. Shuffle the deck and draw again. So it's pretty simple. No issues on that one. Now, here comes where things are, they're different already. So I'm going to move these over just a slight bit here with that. Okay, so the next thing we have is a battlefield pause. Okay, so this is a pass effect. So this is a pass action. And if it is the fourth action, pass action, consecutive pass action. So if you get one of these and you passed, and then the robot passes because they can't do an action, and then you draw another one of these, that will end the action segment. So that would end this, and then we would move on to the next phase of the game. So let's take a look. Now, I've shuffled these up some, not as much, but let's take a look. I want to kind of show you how different this part is. So if we pulled out our next card would be a robot action. So you do the robot. Next step, next card, you flip it over. Robot action again. This is different. The robot's going could go more than you, could go many times before you get to do something. So in this case, that makes it a big difference in how the game is going to play out. There's no, I'll do an activation, the robot does an activation. I'll do an activation, robot does an activation. So what could end up happening is now, so the robot had 2 activations, I have an activation. So I can go through and play my turn. Again, I get to do it again. And there, beginner, so we'll start out, we'll figure, those are different rules, which we'll get into on the next video. Robot, player, random event. Use this card is entirely optional, so there's possibly random events that happen. Robot, player impulse, there we go. Now the player has 2. Robot. So you can see how much of a difference the action segment's going to be compared to the ATS normal activation impulse system. Now, that doesn't make it any worse or bad or anything like that. It's just different, and you still use a lot of the ATS rules, and you're still getting that impulse feeling. It just, you don't know if you're going to get the next impulse or if it's going to be the robot. So once we're done with the activation segment, so we've passed our 4 times, and at that point you would shuffle the deck for the next turn. You go into the close combat segment. And in this case, you'll resolve all melee locations. During this close combat, and this is different than the infiltration phase, because no movement or grenades attacks can occur. We'll talk about this these 2 things in a little bit once I get finished with the sequence of play. But totally different than what usually happens during the infiltration phase. In this case, close combat is the melee happens. Close combat happens, and that's the way it goes. And then finally, you do the end of the turn segment, which is just like the normal ATS end of the turn segment. So, moving forward with that. That is a sequence of play for the robot, so you'll follow it that way. What I want to do next is go through a couple of the rules that are different, that are big difference in the ATS, which there aren't too many with this. So, which is really nice. So a lot of things stay the same. You play the game a little same. And the few differences they have, I actually think may make the game a little bit better. And some of them I think they've actually used in the EVO rules, because some of them seem very, very familiar. So let's go ahead and move on to that. Now, let's talk about those few rules that are the same, that are different when it comes down to it. What makes the few things that they've adjusted to make a difference on this. So I'm just going to put some of these rules up here. So we go through that. Let me pull up the rules that I actually want to talk about. So first rule that I want to talk about is entering enemy locations right here. So entering the enemy location. So units may enter units may enter occupied locations, enemy occupied locations. So basically, I'm not gonna read it all. I'm just gonna summarize it up. Is that since there isn't any movement in the close assault or close combat segment, Units may enter enemy occupied locations during the action segment. So when you do your impulses. So units in that hex that is occupied by enemy may not leave. So once we have two sides in there, you can't get back out. You can't get out. So you can add more troops to it. You just cannot leave it once it's initiated. Interesting enough, if a unit moves into an occupied hex, an enemy occupied hex, that enemy occupy can actually do op fire. And when we get into the cards, you'll see if it actually can be done or not. So we're going to go with that for right now. The other thing is that once you move into a location with an enemy occupied, you cannot attack it through gunfire factors or anything like that. So if friendly units are in a hex, you cannot attack it, even if there are other units on there. Now, two other rules is the grenade attacks, which has to do with a few things. So the grenade attacks, and I want to put this up here. Basically, the grenade attacks can happen when you're adjacent and you use it instead of the normal fire attacks. Pretty simple. You can use it when you're adjacent instead of using your normal gunfire attacks. So this can happen during your impulse. Pretty simple, pretty basic. It's just moving it from one phase to a different phase. And the other rule is the smoke grenades. So this is a little different. So first of all, you get your normal allowance of smoke grenades per rules, per scenario, all that stays the same. What's different is it doesn't count as an activation or movement points if you throw a grenade or a smoke grenade. But you can only throw one grenade per single impulse. So that's a little differently than you can use. You don't have unlimited smoke. You still have the limited amount of smoke you have. You can throw one per impulse. That doesn't count for that unit's activation or anything like that. So that's a little different because usually when you fire smoke, that's uses movement points. In this case, it does not use movement points. So it doesn't count for that unit's activation. But you can only deploy one smoke grenade per single impulse. And those are really the big rules. When we get into using more of the robot, when I'm kind of going through it in more detail and how to use it, and you doing it with a sample of play, we'll get into that. But what I want to get into next is actually the anatomy of the card. Moving on to the anatomy of the card, and this will be the final segment of this video. It may take longer, it may not, but let's go ahead. We're going to go through it and exactly what you do when each card is pulled. The three cards that are pretty simple is human player, the shuffle, and the pause. I really don't need to go through those. I'll show them again one more time. We'll see if I show them again. The real part that I really want to describe is the robot turn. And what you get is a player aid. Now this does fold out, and it is twofold. So I'm going to move this over here just to work it out here. So you do get the twofold player aid, and then you have the cards with that. So when you flip over a card, so we've got a robot player card. So let's take a look at this. So you have a robot player card. You have your instructions. You have down here where it says fire, that is where you have possible opportunity fire. And interceptor is if you have an aircraft to intercept. I haven't run into any scenarios where that's an issue or where that's come up, but it's there in the robot just in case it comes across. Now, forget the B7. The B7 is just the number of the card, so don't worry about that. The number here is if you didn't want to roll a dice for the robot, you could use the card instead. If you were trying to get a low number, so in this case, almost all events, but like rolling on a C casualty chart, you're going to use that one. If you're rolling for something high, which there aren't too many of them, you would use that number. I honestly plan on just using the rolling for the robot. I'm not planning on using the cards. So again, real quick, title. So what you're doing, you have your 4 instructions. In the middle down here is your opportunity fire possibility. It will say hold fire, fire, or, and I probably won't be able to pull one up here. I'll have to look at it. Oh, here we go. We'll just use this one. If you pull up for opportunity fire, and we'll go through how it works. If you have a gunfire factors of 2 or more, you could fire, you could do gunfire factor, or the to hit number, THN to hit number, is 3, you would do opportunity fire. And like I said, we'll get into how that works out when we actually get into actually playing around with this. So now let's take a look at our instructions. So generally speaking, I will tell you from what I've seen, the top is kind of the indirect fire. It's a CFF, an airplane attack, or a mortar attack. Now you have, so in this case you have so if you match it up, and let's see here, I'm going to pull this up here. So if you match it up, it tells you exactly what you do. So in this case, if we had planes, mortars, or a CFF, so the robot player will place a CFF, conduct an airstrike, or use on-map indirect fire, mortar or gun. The order of the icons is the preference if they do it. So CFF first, airplane, mortar. Or in this case, CFF, and then you choose either airplane or mortar, whichever is in this scenario. So remember, you got to go through a lot of the scenario. Now, let's say you don't have any mortars, or you used up all your indirect fire, basically, weapons. So this is kind of like an indirect fire. You have a bonsai charge. You'll conduct a bonsai charge. Well, I can tell you I don't have many scenarios or many modules for bonsai charges, so I'm not too worried about that. Now, you have another line here. Ooh. We have another line here, which tells kinds of doing different thing, bot or suggested or strong. So basically you're going to use this to kind of figure this out. So in this case, it would be this one right here. Sorry about that. We lost a little power. There's a thunderstorm going on. You'd use this one right here. And then finally you would use this. So you would match this up to this one, follow the instructions, and it has if it tie breaks. So if you have 2 of the same things. So that's the anatomy card. So when the robot turns, you start from the top and go to the bottom. It's that simple, and we'll see how that works out and plays out. So that kind of concludes the how does it work without going and actually playing and showing the real details. We'll be doing that soon enough. With that, I want to thank everybody for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Please hit the like button. We want to do. Also, if you have any questions about the robot, please put them up so then I could answer them in the next video when we do our playthrough. Also, if you have any suggestions for the ATSFE staff, please feel free to make comments and we can go through that. So with that, I want to thank you for watching and have a great day.